It was a Tuesday morning in March. I remember it so clearly because the daffodils I had planted 20 years ago were just starting to bloom outside my kitchen window. My kitchen window. I had watched those same flowers bloom every spring since my late husband Henry and I first bought this house in 1962. 63 years of memories lived within these walls. I was making my morning coffee, using the same blue ceramic mug Henry had given me for our 20th anniversary, when my daughter-in-law, Sarah, walked into the kitchen. She was wearing that designer robe I knew cost more than my monthly pension, her perfectly styled hair pulled back in a way that made her look severe. Sarah had always been beautiful, but there was something cold about her beauty that morning. "Margaret," she said, not even looking at me as she opened the refrigerator. "We need to talk about your situation. My situation. That's what she called my life." I set down my mug with trembling hands. "What do you mean, dear?" She sighed, the kind of sigh people make when they're dealing with something unpleasant. "You're becoming too much of a burden. David and I have been discussing it, and we think it's time you considered other living arrangements." The words hit me like a physical blow. Other living arrangements. In the house I had called home for over 6 decades. The house where I had raised my son David, where I had nursed my husband through his final illness, where every corner held a memory of the life I had built. "But Sarah," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "this is my home." She finally turned to look at me, her green eyes cold as winter frost. "Actually, Margaret, it's not. Not anymore. David and I have been carrying this household financially for 3 years now. Your name might be on some old paperwork, but we're the ones who've been paying the bills, the taxes, the maintenance. This is our home now." I felt the room spinning around me. 3 years ago, when Henry passed away, I had been so grateful when David and Sarah offered to move in and help me manage things. I was drowning in grief, overwhelmed by bills and responsibilities I had never handled alone. They had seemed like my salvation. I don't understand," I managed to say. "Look, we're not heartless," Sarah continued, pouring herself orange juice into one of my good crystal glasses. "We found a lovely senior community about an hour away. They have activities, medical care, people your own age. You'd be much happier there. An hour away. Away from my garden, my neighbors who had been friends for decades, my church where I had been a member for 60 years. Away from everything that made me who I was." "Where's David?" I asked, hoping my son would have a different perspective, that this was just Sarah having one of her moods. "He's at work, obviously. Someone has to pay the bills around here." She paused, studying her manicured nails. "He agrees with me, by the way. We talked about it last night after you went to bed. You've become... well, let's just say caring for elderly parents is more expensive than we anticipated." Expensive. That's what I had become. Not a mother, not a person with feelings and memories and rights, just an expensive burden. I stood up slowly, my arthritis making my joints creak like old floorboards. "I think I'll go to my room," I said quietly. "It's not your room anymore either, Margaret. It's our guest room that you're currently occupying." Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. "The sooner you accept that, the easier this transition will be for everyone." I walked through the living room where family photos still sat on the mantel. My wedding picture, David's high school graduation, Christmases and birthdays spanning decades. But I was looking at them differently now. Were these even my memories anymore? Or just decorations in someone else's house? As I climbed the stairs to what had been my bedroom for 60 years, each step felt heavier than the last. At the top of the stairs, I paused and looked back down at Sarah, who was now sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something fundamental had shifted in my world, and I didn't understand how or when it had occurred. How had I gone from being the matriarch of this family to being an unwelcome guest? How had the house I had loved and maintained and filled with life suddenly become a place where I didn't belong? I closed the bedroom door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed I had shared with Henry for 43 years. The morning sun was streaming through the lace curtains I had hung myself in 1965, casting familiar patterns on the hardwood floor Henry and I had refinished together one summer. But for the first time in my 87 years, I felt completely alone in the world, and I had no idea that this was only the beginning. Let me tell you how I got to that terrible Tuesday morning, because the story really begins 3 years earlier, on the worst day of my life. Henry died on a Thursday. After 58 years of marriage, my husband slipped away in his sleep, leaving me to wake up alone for the first time since I was 24 years old. The silence in the house was deafening. No more of Henry's gentle snoring, no more coffee brewing at 6 a.m. sharp, no more of his terrible jokes at the breakfast table. I was completely lost. Henry had handled all our finances, not because I couldn't, but because we had fallen into traditional roles and it had worked for us. Suddenly, I was faced with bills I didn't understand, insurance forms that might as well have been written in a foreign language, and a house that felt impossibly large and empty. That's when David stepped in. My son, my only child, arrived at the funeral with Sarah and their 2 teenage children, Emma and Josh. David had grown into a successful man. He worked in real estate development and wore expensive suits that made him look important. I was so proud of him and so grateful when he sat me down the day after the funeral and said, "Mom, you shouldn't have to deal with all this alone." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, still numb from grief. "All the financial stuff, the house maintenance, everything. Sarah and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if we moved in with you for a while, just until you get back on your feet." It seemed like an answer to prayer. My house would be filled with family again, laughter, conversation, the sounds of life. David could handle the overwhelming paperwork, and I could be a grandmother to Emma and Josh on a daily basis instead of just during holidays and summer visits. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I know Sarah loves your house in Westfield." Sarah, who had been sitting quietly beside David, reached over and patted my hand. "Margaret, family comes first. We want to help you through this difficult time." I was so touched by their generosity. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was. But in my grief, their offer felt like a lifeline. The transition seemed smooth at first. David took over paying bills, dealing with insurance companies, handling the property taxes. Sarah managed the household, grocery shopping, cleaning schedules, meal planning. The kids brought energy back into the house, even if they seemed more interested in their phones and video games than in spending time with their grandmother. But slowly, subtly, things began to change. It started with small things. Sarah would reorganize my kitchen, moving items to places that made no sense to me. When I'd ask where she'd put my good mixing bowls, she'd say, "Oh, I stored those away. We don't really need so many dishes cluttering the cabinets." My dishes, cluttering, in my own kitchen. Then it was my furniture. "Margaret, this old sofa is really falling apart. David and I saw a beautiful sectional at the furniture store that would look so much better in here." Before I knew it, the couch where Henry and I had watched 30 years of evening news together was gone, replaced by a modern leather monstrosity that was too firm for my old bones and too big for the room. "Where did my couch go?" I asked David one evening. "We donated it, Mom. The new one is much nicer, don't you think? And it'll last longer." But it wasn't nicer to me. It was strange and uncomfortable and held no memories. When I tried to explain this to Sarah, she laughed and said, "Oh, Margaret, you have to embrace change. Living in the past isn't healthy. Living in the past." As if my memories were a disease to be cured. The changes accelerated. My china cabinet was moved to the basement to make room for Sarah's modern entertainment center. My grandmother's rocking chair was relegated to the guest room because it didn't match the aesthetic. Photo albums that had sat on the coffee table for decades were packed away because they created visual clutter. I began to feel like I was watching my life being erased, piece by piece. But whenever I tried to protest, David would look at me with concern and say, "Mom, we're just trying to help. Don't you want the house to look nice?" Of course I wanted the house to look nice, but I also wanted it to feel like home. My home. The most painful change was in my relationship with my grandchildren. Emma and Josh had been so affectionate when they visited for holidays, but living in the same house seemed to create distance between us. They were busy with school, friends, activities. When I'd suggest we bake cookies together or work in the garden, they'd exchange glances with their mother. "Grandma Margaret," Emma said one day, "maybe you should find some friends your own age. We're kind of busy with our own stuff, friends my own age, at church, at the senior center, anywhere but in my own home with my own family." I started spending more time alone in my room, reading or looking through old photo albums when no one was around to see me living in the past. I felt like I was disappearing, becoming invisible in my own life. But the worst was yet to come, because what I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that David and Sarah's helpfulness had a darker purpose. The bills they were paying, the decisions they were making, the changes they were implementing, it was all part of a plan I was too trusting, too grateful to see. It would take me 2 more years to discover what that plan really was. 2 years of feeling like an unwelcome guest in my own home before I finally learned the truth that would change everything. The months that followed became a masterclass in how to make someone feel invisible in their own life. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. If it had been, I might have recognized it for what it was. Instead, it was a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone, so gradual that I barely noticed, until I was left with almost nothing. Sarah had a particular talent for making me feel small. She never raised her voice, never said anything outright cruel. Instead, she used 1,000 tiny cuts that were somehow worse than any harsh words could have been. "Margaret, you left the coffee pot on again," she'd say with a concerned sigh. "We really need to be more careful. At your age, memory issues are so common. I hadn't left the coffee pot on, I was certain of it. But when I protested, she'd give me that pitying look that made me question my own mind. "Oh, sweetie, it's okay. It happens to everyone. Maybe we should start making a checklist for you to follow in the mornings." A checklist for making coffee in the kitchen I'd used for 60 years. The gaslighting, though I didn't know that term then, became a daily occurrence. Items would go missing, then reappear in strange places. Sarah would claim I had moved them and forgotten. Bills that I was sure Henry had set up for automatic payment would suddenly be overdue, and Sarah would shake her head sadly. "Poor Margaret, the stress of losing Henry has really affected your memory. Thank goodness David and I are here to help." I began to doubt everything about myself. Was I really becoming forgetful? Was grief affecting my mind more than I realized? The uncertainty was almost worse than the constant corrections and gentle rebukes. David, when he was home from work, seemed distant and stressed. Gone was the affectionate son who used to call me twice a week just to chat. Now our conversations were brief and focused on practical matters. "Mom, "Sarah says you've been having trouble remembering to take your medications," he said one evening, not even looking up from his laptop. "I haven't had trouble," I replied. "I've been taking the same pills at the same time for years." "Well, we're going to set up a pill organizer for you anyway. Just to be safe. Just to be safe." Everything was just to be safe now, as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted with the simplest tasks. The pill organizer was followed by other helpful measures. Sarah began doing my laundry, claiming I was using too much detergent and ruining the clothes. She took over grocery shopping because I supposedly bought items we didn't need. She even started intercepting my mail, organizing it for me so I wouldn't be overwhelmed by all the confusing paperwork. My independence was being stripped away piece by piece, always under the guise of caring and concern. The social isolation was perhaps the most painful part. My friend Dorothy from church stopped by one afternoon, as she had done every Wednesday for the past 15 years. We would have tea and share neighborhood gossip, a ritual that had become precious to me since Henry's death. But when Dorothy arrived, Sarah intercepted her at the door. "Oh, Dorothy, I'm so sorry, but Margaret is having a difficult day. She's been quite confused lately, and I think visitors might overstimulate her. Perhaps you could call ahead next time." I watched from the living room window as Dorothy walked away, confusion and hurt written across her face. When I confronted Sarah about it later, she looked genuinely concerned. "Margaret, you were in your robe at 2 in the afternoon. Dorothy would have been embarrassed for you. I was protecting your dignity. I had been in my robe because I'd spilled coffee on my dress and was about to change. But explaining felt useless. Sarah always had a reasonable explanation, always sounded like the responsible adult dealing with a difficult elderly person. Soon, other friends stopped coming by. Phone calls became less frequent. Sarah would take messages and forget to give them to me, or she'd tell callers that I was resting or not feeling well. My world grew smaller and smaller until it consisted of just the house and the family that was making me feel like a stranger within it. The children, Emma and Josh, seemed to absorb their parents' attitude toward me. Where they had once given me hugs and asked about my day, now they barely acknowledged my presence. They'd walk into a room, greet their parents, and ignore me completely, as if I were a piece of furniture. "Good morning, Mom. Good morning, Dad," Emma would say, grabbing breakfast and heading out for school. "Good morning, Emma," I'd say from my spot at the kitchen table. She'd glance at me with mild surprise, as if she'd forgotten I existed, then mumble something that might have been a greeting before disappearing. I began to feel like a ghost in my own life, present but not really seen, certainly not heard. The breaking point came on my 85th birthday. I woke up that morning with a small flutter of hope in my chest. Surely, on my birthday, I would feel like part of the family again. Surely David would remember the tradition Henry and I had maintained for decades, chocolate chip pancakes for birthday breakfasts. But when I came downstairs, Sarah was packing the children's school lunches. David was reading emails on his phone, and there was no sign that anyone remembered what day it was. "Good morning," I said, waiting. "Morning, Mom," David replied absently. I waited through breakfast, thinking maybe they were planning something special for later. I waited through lunch, telling myself they must be organizing a surprise. I waited through dinner, my heart sinking with each passing hour. It wasn't until I was getting ready for bed that David knocked on my door. "Oh, Mom, I just remembered. Happy birthday. Sorry, it's been such a crazy day at work." He handed me a gift card to a restaurant I'd never heard of, probably something Sarah had grabbed at the grocery store. No card, no hug, no acknowledgement of the 85 years of life I was celebrating. As I lay in bed that night, I realized that I had become exactly what Sarah had called me that terrible Tuesday morning. A burden. Not a mother, not a grandmother, not a person with feelings and memories and dignity. Just an expensive, inconvenient burden that they were all waiting to dispose of. But what I didn't know yet, what would have shocked me to my core if I had discovered it then, was that my family's neglect wasn't just about finding me inconvenient. It was calculated, purposeful, and part of a plan that would have devastated me if I had understood its true scope. The truth was still hidden from me, but it was about to surface in a way that would change everything. The conversation about other living arrangements that Tuesday morning wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my awakening. After Sarah left for her yoga class and David went to work, I sat in what they now called their kitchen, trying to process what had just happened. The words kept echoing in my mind. Your name might be on some old paperwork, but we're the ones who've been paying the bills. Old paperwork. As if the deed to my house was some dusty relic instead of the legal document that proved my ownership of the home Henry and I had paid off 20 years ago. Something wasn't right. My mind might not be as sharp as it once was, but I wasn't senile. I knew I owned this house. Henry and I had celebrated the day we made our final mortgage payment with a bottle of champagne and dreams of leaving something substantial to David. But doubt crept in. Had things changed after Henry died? Had David taken over more than just bill paying? Had I signed something in my grief that I didn't remember or understand? That afternoon I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I went to my old filing cabinet in the basement, the one David had said he'd organized for me, but that I wasn't supposed to worry about anymore. My hands shook as I pulled out the folders, looking for the house deed, the insurance papers, anything that would tell me the truth about my own home. The filing cabinet was nearly empty. Gone were decades of important documents, tax returns, insurance policies, bank statements. In their place were just a few recent papers, utilities bills, property tax statements, all with David's name on them. My heart started racing. Where were my documents? Where was the deed Henry and I had kept in the fireproof box on the top shelf? I searched frantically through the remaining papers, finding only fragments of my former financial life. But at the bottom of one folder, I found something that made my blood run cold. A copy of a power of attorney document, dated 6 months after Henry's death, with my signature at the bottom. I didn't remember signing it. I didn't even remember seeing it. The document gave David complete authority over my finances, my property, my medical decisions, everything. According to this paper, I had essentially signed away my independence, my ownership of everything I held dear. But the signature... I stared at it for a long time. It looked like mine. But something felt wrong about it. The angle was slightly off, the pressure uneven. Had I really signed this, or had I signed something else entirely and not read the fine print? In my grief-stricken state, had I trusted my son so completely that I'd handed over my entire life without understanding what I was doing? I tucked the document into my pocket and climbed the stairs slowly, my mind racing. If this power of attorney was legitimate, then Sarah was right. David could do whatever he wanted with the house, with my life, with my future. But if it wasn't... That evening at dinner, I tried to bring up the subject carefully. David, sweetheart, I've been thinking about what Sarah said this morning. About the house, I mean. David barely looked up from his plate. What about it? Well, I just want to understand the legal situation. This was your father's and my home for so many years. Sarah interrupted with a laugh that held no warmth. Margaret, we've been over this. The financial realities have changed. You can't live in the past forever. But the deed... Mom, David said, finally looking at me with obvious irritation. We handle all that stuff now. You don't need to worry about paperwork and legal documents. That's what the power of attorney is for." "I don't remember signing a power of attorney," I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. David and Sarah exchanged a look that spoke volumes: guilt, worry, calculation. "Mom, you were in no state to remember much of anything those first few months after Dad died," David said finally. "You were grieving, confused, barely eating. We were worried about you. The power of attorney was necessary to help you through that difficult time. But now I'm better," I said. "Couldn't we revise it or—" "No." Sarah's voice was sharp, then she softened it. "I mean, why complicate things when the current arrangement works so well? David has everything organized perfectly." That night, I lay awake thinking about that power of attorney document, about the missing papers from my filing cabinet, about the 3 years of feeling like a stranger in my own home. Pieces of a puzzle were starting to come together, forming a picture I didn't want to see. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to see Harold Morrison, the lawyer who had handled Henry's and my affairs for 30 years. If anyone could help me understand what had really happened to my life, it would be Harold. But first, I had to get out of the house without Sarah noticing. She had taken to monitoring my activities closely, always asking where I was going, offering to drive me places, ensuring I was never alone for long. I waited until Sarah left for her morning workout and David was at the office. Then I called a taxi, something I hadn't done in years, and asked the driver to meet me at the corner instead of the house. Harold's office was in the same building where it had been for decades, but he looked much older than I remembered. His face lit up when he saw me, though. "Margaret, what a wonderful surprise. How are you holding up?" "I need your help, Harold," I said, settling into the familiar leather chair across from his desk. "I think something terrible has happened, and I don't know what to do about it." I showed him the power of attorney document, told him about the missing papers, explained how I'd been feeling like a prisoner in my own home. Harold listened carefully, occasionally asking questions, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret," he said finally, "I need to ask you some difficult questions. Do you remember coming to see me about 18 months ago?" I frowned. "No, I don't think so. According to my records, you came in with David to discuss transferring the house deed into his name. You seemed not quite yourself that day, confused, anxious. I suggested we wait, that you should think about it more, maybe get a second opinion, but you insisted it was what you wanted." My heart sank. "I don't remember that at all. You also asked me to draft a new will, leaving everything to David immediately rather than keeping the life estate you and Henry had set up. A new will. The house deed transferred." I felt the room spinning around me. "Harold," I whispered, "I don't remember any of this. Are you sure it was really me making these decisions?" His face was grave as he opened a file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "Let me show you something, Margaret. And I want you to tell me honestly if you remember signing these documents." What Harold showed me next would reveal the full scope of what had been done to me, and give me the ammunition I needed to fight back. Harold spread the documents across his desk like a prosecutor laying out evidence. Each paper was a piece of my life that had been taken from me, signed away in my own handwriting during moments I couldn't even remember. "This is the deed transfer," Harold said, pointing to the first document. "Signed 8 months after Henry died. It transferred full ownership of your house to David." I stared at the signature. It was mine, but the writing looked shaky, uncertain. I don't remember this at all." "And here's the new will," Harold continued, replacing the one Henry and I carefully crafted to protect you. The original will give you a life estate in the house, meaning you could live there until you died, and only then would it go to David. This new will gives David immediate ownership of everything. My hands trembled as I looked at document after document, bank account transfers, investment accounts. Even my mother's jewelry collection had been signed over to Sarah. Everything Henry and I had worked for our entire lives, everything we had saved and cherished, had been methodically transferred away from me. "Harold, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," I said, my voice barely steady. "Do these signatures look right to you? Do they look like me in my right mind?" Harold put on his reading glasses and examined the signatures carefully. "Margaret, I've known your signature for 30 years. These, well, they're yours, but they're different. Shaky, hesitant, not the firm handwriting I remember. Could someone have guided my hand, or had me sign blank papers?" His face grew dark. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm not sure what I'm suggesting. All I know is that I've lost everything, including my memory of losing it." Harold leaned back in his chair, clearly disturbed. "Margaret, there's something else. Something that's been bothering me since that day you came in 18 months ago." "What?" David seemed eager, pushy. He kept saying you were having memory problems, that you needed to get your affairs in order while you still could. But you, Margaret, you seemed confused about why you were there. You kept asking why you needed to sign papers, what the hurry was. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so ugly I could hardly bear to look at it. "What did you tell them?" "I told David that these were major decisions that shouldn't be rushed. I suggested you take the papers home, think about them for a few weeks, maybe get independent advice. But David said there wasn't time, that your condition was deteriorating rapidly." "My condition?" I felt a flash of anger. Harold, other than normal grief after losing my husband of 58 years, there was nothing wrong with my condition. That's what bothered me. "You seemed sad, yes, and a little confused about the legal technicalities, but you didn't seem mentally incompetent. Yet David kept insisting we needed to act quickly before you got worse." I felt sick. "So you think David manipulated me into signing these papers?" "I think," Harold said carefully, "that someone took advantage of your grief and confusion to obtain your signature on documents that you may not have fully understood." Harold's words hung in the air like a death sentence. My own son, the boy I had loved, nurtured, supported through college, celebrated when he got married and had children, had systematically stolen my life from me. "What can I do?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. "That's the difficult part, Margaret. These documents are legally binding. Even if they were obtained through undue influence or manipulation, proving that in court would be extremely challenging. You'd need evidence of coercion, witnesses, proof that you weren't mentally competent when you signed them. But I was competent. I was just trusting. I know that, and I believe you. But the law sees valid signatures on properly witnessed documents. The burden would be on you to prove they were obtained improperly." My heart sank. "So there's nothing I can do? David gets to keep everything, and I just have to accept being thrown out of my own home?" Harold was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his eyes lit up with an idea. "Actually, Margaret, there might be something. Something David doesn't know about." "What do you mean?" "Before your husband died, he came to see me alone. He was worried about what might happen to you, worried that David might not always make decisions in your best interest. Henry knew his son better than you realized." I felt a chill. "What did Henry do?" "He set up a safety net. An account that only you have access to, separate from everything else. It was meant to ensure you'd never be completely helpless, no matter what happened. Harold opened his safe and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name on it. Henry made me promise to give this to you only if you ever came to me saying you felt threatened or unsafe in your own home. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a key and a letter in Henry's familiar handwriting. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, it means something has gone wrong with David. I pray I'm wrong about my suspicions, but if not, this key is to a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside, you'll find copies of all our original documents, including a letter I wrote explaining my concerns about David's behavior toward you. There's also enough money to hire a lawyer and start fresh if you need to. I love you always, and I promise you won't have to face this alone. Henry. Tears streamed down my face as I read Henry's words. Even in death, my husband was still protecting me, still looking out for me when no one else would. Harold, I said, gripping the key tightly, I want to fight this. I want to get my life back. It won't be easy, Margaret. David has had 3 years to establish legal ownership of everything, but with Henry's evidence and my testimony about the suspicious circumstances of those document signings, we might have a chance. For the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Hope. But I also felt something else. A burning determination to make David and Sarah pay for what they had done to me. They had counted on my being too old, too weak, too trusting to fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I left Harold's office with a new sense of purpose, but also with a heavy heart. The husband I had mourned for 3 years had seen this betrayal coming and had tried to protect me, even from beyond the grave. Henry's foresight would become my salvation. But first, I had to be very careful about how I proceeded. David and Sarah could not know what I had discovered. Not yet. The taxi dropped me off at the corner again, and I walked slowly back to the house, my mind racing with plans. I needed to get to that safety deposit box, but I also needed to gather more evidence of what David and Sarah had been doing to me. When I entered the house, Sarah was in the kitchen, talking animatedly on her phone. She glanced at me with mild curiosity. "Margaret, where were you?" "I came back from the gym and couldn't find you anywhere." "I took a walk," I said simply. The weather was nice. "A walk? By yourself? Margaret, that's not safe at your age. What if you had fallen or gotten lost?" There it was again, the patronizing concern, the assumption that I was incompetent. But now I understood it for what it really was. A deliberate campaign to make me question my own capabilities. "I've been walking around this neighborhood for 60 years, Sarah. I think I can manage a few blocks." She gave me that pitying look I had come to hate. "Of course, dear. I'm just worried about you. We all are." That evening at dinner, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I was going to start gathering evidence, and I was going to start with the people who knew me best. People who could testify that I wasn't the confused, incompetent person David and Sarah were portraying me as. "I've been thinking," I said during a lull in conversation, "I'd like to start going to church again regularly. I haven't been as involved as I used to be." David looked up from his phone. "Mom, is that really necessary? Sarah's been driving you when you want to go. I used to attend Bible study on Wednesdays and volunteer with the Ladies' Auxiliary. I miss being active in the congregation." "But Margaret," Sarah interjected, "you've seemed so tired lately, so overwhelmed by social situations. Are you sure you're up to all that activity?" "I feel fine," I said firmly. "In fact, I feel better than I have in months." The look that passed between David and Sarah was telling. This was not part of their plan. An isolated, dependent Margaret was useful to them. A socially active, connected Margaret was potentially dangerous. "We'll see," David said finally. "Let's take it slow." But I had no intention of taking it slow. The next morning, after they both left the house, I called Dorothy, my old friend from church, whom Sarah had turned away at the door. "Dorothy, it's Margaret. I owe you a huge apology." "Margaret! Oh, honey, I've been so worried about you. When that daughter-in-law of yours said you weren't well, I didn't know what to think. That's what I need to talk to you about. Could you come over today? I need to tell you some things, and I might need your help." An hour later, Dorothy was sitting in my living room, her face growing more shocked with each detail I shared. Dorothy had known me for 30 years. She had been there when Henry and I celebrated our anniversary, when we bought our first grandchildren's Christmas presents, when Henry got sick. She knew I was sharp, capable, and independent. "Margaret, this is elder abuse," she said bluntly. "What they've done to you, the way they've isolated you and taken over your finances, this is a crime." "Will you help me?" I asked. "Of course I will." "What do you need?" "I need witnesses. People who can testify that I'm mentally competent, that I've been competent all along. People who can describe how David and Sarah have been treating me." Dorothy nodded grimly. "I'll call the other ladies from Bible study. We've all been worried about you, wondering why you disappeared from church activities. Several of them have asked about you. Over the next week, I carefully rebuilt connections that Sarah had systematically destroyed. My friend Ruth came for coffee and was appalled to learn how I'd been living. Eleanor from the church choir visited and documented how lucid and sharp I was, despite David and Sarah's claims about my declining mental state. But the most important evidence came from an unexpected source, my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Mrs. Patterson was 78, sharp as a tack, and had lived next door for 15 years. More importantly, she had been keeping a diary of concerning things she'd observed at my house. "I knew something wasn't right," she told me when I finally worked up the courage to visit her. "The way that daughter-in-law of yours spoke to you, the way she'd intercept your mail and turn away your visitors. And the shouting." "Shouting? Oh, my dear, you don't remember?" "There have been several occasions where I heard David or Sarah yelling at you, calling you names, telling you how much trouble you were causing them. It broke my heart, but I didn't know what to do." Mrs. Patterson's diary entries went back 2 years and documented incident after incident of emotional abuse, financial control, and social isolation. She had even recorded dates and times when she saw me looking distressed or when she witnessed Sarah turning away visitors. But the most valuable information came when I finally made it to First National Bank with Henry's key. The safety deposit box contained everything Henry had promised and more. There were copies of all our original financial documents, proving that I had owned significant assets before David took control. There was Henry's letter detailing his suspicions about David's motivations. And there was something I hadn't expected: photographs. Henry had apparently been documenting David's behavior toward me even before his death. Pictures of David going through my personal papers when he thought I wasn't looking. Photos of tense conversations where David appeared to be pressuring me. Even a picture of me looking confused and distressed while David stood over me with documents in his hand. But the most damning evidence was a recording device, a small digital recorder that Henry had apparently hidden in the living room. On it were conversations between David and Sarah from after Henry's funeral, planning how to gain control of my assets and eventually move me out of the house. Hearing my son's voice plotting against me was almost more than I could bear, but it was also the proof I needed. Sarah's voice was clear on the recording. "We need to make her feel incompetent. make her dependent on us. Once she signs over the house, we can start looking into senior housing options. And David's response? She trusts me completely. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her. I sat in the bank's privacy room, listening to my own family discuss me like I was a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be loved. And I felt something inside me harden into steel. They had underestimated me. They had assumed that because I was old, I was helpless. They had counted on my love for them to make me blind to their betrayal. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I was Henry's wife. I had survived the Great Depression, raised a child, buried parents, weathered decades of life's challenges. I was stronger than they knew, and I was about to prove it. Armed with evidence and surrounded by a growing network of supportive friends, I felt ready to take the next step. But Harold had advised me to be strategic about the confrontation. "Margaret, you have two choices," he had explained during our second meeting. "We can file a lawsuit immediately, which will take months or years to resolve, or you can confront them directly with the evidence and see if they're willing to negotiate a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" "Full restoration of your property and assets, plus damages for emotional distress. If they refuse, then we go to court with all the evidence we've gathered." I chose the direct confrontation. I wanted to see David's face when he realized that his confused, helpless mother had outsmarted him. I planned the confrontation for a Sunday afternoon when I knew both David and Sarah would be home, relaxed and unsuspecting. Emma and Josh were at friends' houses. I didn't want the children to witness what was about to happen. I set up my phone to record the conversation, just as Harold had instructed. Then I arranged all my evidence on the dining room table. The original documents from Henry's safety deposit box, Mrs. Patterson's diary entries, statements from my friends attesting to my mental competency, and most importantly, the recordings of David and Sarah planning their scheme. At 2 p.m., I called them into the dining room. "David, Sarah, I need to speak with you both about something important." They came in looking mildly annoyed, as if I were interrupting their weekend relaxation with something trivial. "What is it, Mom?" David asked, barely glancing at the papers spread across the table. "I know what you've done to me," I said simply. The change in their expressions was immediate and telling. Sarah's face went pale, while David's jaw tightened with what looked like anger rather than guilt. "I don't know what you're talking about," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really?" I picked up the transcript of their recorded conversation. "Then perhaps you can explain this conversation where you and Sarah discuss making me feel incompetent so I'll sign over my assets." I read Sarah's words back to them. "We need to make her feel incompetent, make her dependent on us." Then David's response, "She trusts me completely. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah sank into a chair, her face in her hands. David's facade of innocence crumbled, replaced by defensive anger. "You were recording us? In our own home?" "My home," I corrected firmly. "This is my house, David. It always has been, despite the papers you tricked me into signing." "I didn't trick you into anything," David's voice rose. "You were falling apart after Dad died. Someone had to take responsibility. Taking responsibility and stealing from me are two different things." I held up the copy of the original house deed. "This house was paid off 20 years ago. Your father and I owned it free and clear. You had no right to take it from me." Sarah finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Margaret, we were trying to help you. We thought—" "You thought you could manipulate a grieving old woman into signing away her life," I interrupted. "You isolated me from my friends, made me doubt my own mind, treated me like a burden you couldn't wait to get rid of." David was pacing now, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't understand the financial pressure we've been under. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain this house, to take care of you? We've sacrificed our own plans, our own dreams." Sacrificed? I felt my voice rising for the first time in 3 years. "You've been living in my house rent-free, using my money to pay for your lifestyle, planning to sell my home out from under me. What exactly have you sacrificed? Our privacy, our independence, our future," David shouted. "Sarah and I had plans to travel, to buy a better house in a better neighborhood. Instead, we're stuck here playing caregiver to someone who can barely remember to turn off the coffee pot." "I never forgot to turn off the coffee pot," I said quietly. "You and Sarah made that up, along with all the other stories about my supposed mental decline." The truth was out now, hanging in the air between us like a toxic cloud. David stared at me with something that looked almost like hatred, as if I had personally wronged him by refusing to be the helpless victim he needed me to be. "What do you want?" Sarah asked through her tears. "I want my life back," I said. "I want the house deed returned to my name. I want all my financial accounts restored. I want my belongings returned from wherever you've stored them, and I want both of you out of my house." David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You can't prove any of this. Those documents were signed legally, witnessed properly. Good luck convincing a court that you were somehow tricked into signing papers that you read and agreed to." That's when I played my trump card. I pressed play on Henry's recording device, filling the room with their voices from 3 years ago, planning their strategy to gain control of my assets. The blood drained from David's face as he heard his own voice plotting against me. Sarah began sobbing openly. "Your father knew," I said softly. "He knew what kind of person you really were, David. He tried to warn me, tried to protect me. Even from his grave, he's still taking care of me better than his own son ever did." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of shame in David's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by calculation. "Fine," he said. "You win. We'll work out the legal details with your lawyer. But don't expect us to stick around and pretend we're one big happy family." "I wouldn't want you to," I replied. "I want you out by the end of the month." Sarah looked up with desperate eyes. "Margaret, please. We have nowhere to go. The children's school." "You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from me," I said, surprised by my own firmness. "You made your choices. Now you live with the consequences." As they left the dining room, defeated and exposed, I felt a mixture of triumph and profound sadness. I had won my life back, but at the cost of losing the family I had thought I had. But as I sat alone in my dining room, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, I realized something important. I hadn't lost my family. I had discovered that the family I thought I had was an illusion. The real loss had happened years ago when David chose money over love, convenience over compassion. What I had gained was far more valuable: my dignity, my independence, and the knowledge that I was stronger than anyone, including myself, had believed. The legal process of undoing 3 years of financial manipulation was more complex than I had anticipated, but Harold proved to be as sharp as ever. Within 2 weeks of the confrontation, we had filed papers to restore my ownership of the house and reverse all the asset transfers that had been obtained under questionable circumstances. David and Sarah hired their own lawyer, of course, but their position was weak. The recordings were damaging. Mrs. Patterson's diary entries established a pattern of abuse, and my friends' testimonies proved that I had been mentally competent throughout the entire period in question. More importantly, Harold had found something in the original power of attorney document that we had missed initially. The signatures of the witnesses were forged. David had apparently asked 2 of his work colleagues to sign as witnesses, but when Harold contacted them, they swore they had never seen the document before and had never witnessed me signing anything. That discovery turned David's manipulation from unethical behavior into outright fraud. Margaret, Harold told me during one of our meetings, with this evidence, we could pursue criminal charges if you wanted to. Document fraud, elder abuse, financial exploitation, these are serious crimes. I considered it. Part of me, the angry, hurt part, wanted to see David face real consequences for what he had done. But another part of me, the part that remembered the little boy who used to crawl into my lap for bedtime stories, couldn't bear the thought of sending my own son to prison. I just want my life back, I told Harold. If they cooperate with returning everything they took, I won't press criminal charges. The negotiation took place in Harold's office on a gray Tuesday morning in November. David and Sarah sat across from Harold and me, their lawyer whispering urgently in David's ear. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of their exposed scheme. My clients are prepared to return full ownership of the house to Mrs. Morrison, their lawyer announced. They will also restore the financial accounts and return all personal belongings. And the damages? Harold asked. What damages? David's lawyer responded. My clients provided Mrs. Morrison with room and board for 3 years, managed her affairs during a difficult period. Your client psychologically abused an elderly woman and systematically stole her assets, Harold interrupted coldly. We're seeking $50,000 in damages for emotional distress, plus legal fees. David started to object, but his lawyer held up a hand. After a whispered consultation, he nodded reluctantly. Agreed. In exchange, Mrs. Morrison agrees not to pursue criminal charges. As we signed the settlement papers, David finally looked directly at me for the first time in weeks. Mom, he said quietly, I want you to know that I never meant for things to go this far. It started as genuinely wanting to help, and then you got greedy, I finished. And then you convinced yourself that I was too old and incompetent to deserve respect or dignity. His face reddened, but he didn't deny it. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Margaret. We lost our way. I looked at both of them, this son I had raised and loved, this daughter-in-law I had welcomed into my family, and felt a profound sadness for what we had all lost. I accept your apology, I said quietly, but I can't forgive what you did. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Within a week, the house deed was back in my name. The financial accounts were restored. The modern furniture was replaced with my own belongings, retrieved from the storage unit where they had been kept. Even my grandmother's rocking chair found its way back to the living room where it belonged. David and Sarah moved out on a cold December morning. Emma and Josh hugged me goodbye. They were good children who had been caught up in their parents' scheme without understanding what was really happening. I told them they would always be welcome to visit their grandmother, that the sins of their parents didn't extend to them. I didn't hear from David for several months. Then, in March, almost exactly a year after that terrible Tuesday morning when Sarah had told me I didn't belong in my own home, I received a letter. The envelope was addressed in David's familiar handwriting, and for a moment my heart fluttered with the old maternal hope that maybe, somehow, we could find our way back to each other. But as I read his words, that hope faded. Dear Mom, I hope this letter finds you well. Sarah and I have been in counseling, trying to understand how things went so wrong between us. Our therapist suggested I write to you to express my feelings. I want you to know that I am sorry for the pain we caused you, but I also need you to understand that we felt trapped by circumstances. Taking care of an elderly parent is more difficult than anyone realizes until they're in that situation. We made mistakes, yes, but they came from a place of stress and overwhelm, not malice. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive us and we can be a family again. The children miss their grandmother. Love, David. I read the letter 3 times, waiting for some acknowledgement of the magnitude of what they had done, some recognition of the systematic way they had stripped away my dignity and independence. But there was none. Even in his apology, David was still making excuses, still portraying himself as the victim of difficult circumstances rather than the architect of deliberate cruelty. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. Maybe someday I would be ready to rebuild a relationship with my son, but not yet. Not while he still couldn't see me as anything more than a burden he had been forced to carry. Meanwhile, my real healing was happening in other ways. Dorothy had organized a group of ladies from church to help me settle back into my house and my life. They came over regularly, not because I needed caretaking, but because we were friends who enjoyed each other's company. We played cards, worked in the garden together, shared meals and stories and laughter. Mrs. Patterson became a dear friend, often joining me for afternoon tea and helping me tend the flower garden that had been neglected during David and Sarah's occupation. We laughed about how we had been neighbors for 15 years, but had never really gotten to know each other until this crisis brought us together. "You know, Margaret," she said one afternoon as we deadheaded the roses, "watching what you went through and how you fought back has inspired me. I've always been too intimidated by legal matters, too afraid to stand up for myself. But seeing you take on your own son and win, it's given me courage to handle some issues in my own life." That comment meant more to me than any legal victory could have. I realized that my story wasn't just about getting my house back or proving that I wasn't the helpless old woman David and Sarah had tried to make me believe I was. It was about showing other elderly people that they don't have to accept mistreatment just because they're getting older, that age doesn't equal helplessness, that dignity and respect are rights, not privileges that can be taken away by family members who find them inconvenient. Harold continued to be not just my lawyer, but a trusted friend. He helped me set up new safeguards to protect my assets and my independence. We established a trust that would prevent anyone from manipulating me in the future, and we created clear directives for my care if I ever truly did become mentally incompetent. The irony, Harold told me one day, is that by fighting back against David's claim that you were losing your mental faculties, you've proven beyond any doubt that you're as sharp and capable as you've ever been. You've probably got another 20 good years ahead of you, Margaret. 20 years. The thought was both exciting and daunting. I was 87 years old, living alone in a house that was finally truly mine again. I had my independence, my dignity, and my self-respect restored. But I also had to face the reality that I had lost my son, perhaps permanently, in the process of saving myself. Some days, that loss felt overwhelming. I would see a father and adult son together at the grocery store, or hear one of my friends talking about a family dinner with their children, and the grief would hit me like a physical blow. But then I would remember the cold calculation in David's voice on those recordings, the way Sarah had looked at me like I was an inconvenience to be disposed of. And I would know that what I had lost wasn't real love. It was the illusion of love, built on my usefulness to them rather than any genuine care for my well-being. The real measure of my healing came 6 months after David and Sarah moved out. Emma, who was now 17, came to see me on her own. She took the bus from their new apartment across town, walked up to my front door, and knocked tentatively. "Grandma? Can I come in?" She was taller than I remembered, more mature, carrying herself with the careful dignity of someone who had been through difficult times. I hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the solid warmth of this granddaughter I had missed so desperately. "I've been wanting to visit," she said as we sat in the living room with tea and cookies. "But Mom and Dad said you probably didn't want to see any of us." "I always want to see you and Josh," I told her. "What your parents did doesn't change how much I love you both." Emma was quiet for a moment, then looked up at me with eyes that seemed older than her 17 years. "Grandma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Of course, sweetheart." "Were Mom and Dad really as bad as everyone says? I mean, I know they did something wrong with money and legal stuff, but they keep telling us that you overreacted, that it was all just a misunderstanding about how to take care of you." I chose my words carefully. Emma deserved honesty, but she also deserved to maintain some relationship with her parents if possible. "Your parents made some very serious mistakes," I said. "They took things that belonged to me and made me feel like I wasn't welcome in my own home. They isolated me from my friends and made me doubt my own abilities. Those aren't small misunderstandings, Emma. They're serious violations of trust." She nodded slowly. "I thought so. I remember how different you seemed when we were living here. Quieter, sadder. Mom always said it was because you were getting old and confused, but you seem perfectly fine now." "I was never confused," I said gently. "I was just very sad and very lonely." Emma stayed for 3 hours that afternoon. We talked about school, her plans for college, her boyfriend who was teaching her to play guitar. Normal grandmother-granddaughter conversation that felt like water to a woman dying of thirst. As she was getting ready to leave, she hugged me again and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Grandma, for fighting back, for standing up for yourself. It must have been scary." "It was terrifying," I admitted, "but sometimes doing the right thing is scary." After Emma left, I sat in my living room as the sun set, surrounded by my own furniture, my own memories, my own choices about how to spend my evening. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the oppressive silence of feeling unwelcome in my own home. I thought about Henry, about how he had protected me even after death, about how his love had given me the strength to save myself. I thought about Dorothy and Mrs. Patterson and Harold, about the community of people who had supported me through the darkest period of my life. I thought about Emma, growing into a strong young woman who could recognize injustice and wasn't afraid to reach out across the divide her parents had created. Most of all, I thought about the woman I had discovered myself to be, not the helpless, confused burden David and Sarah had tried to convince me I was, but a fighter, a survivor, someone worthy of respect and dignity, regardless of her age. The hardest lesson I had learned was that sometimes the people who claim to love us the most can be the ones who hurt us the deepest. But the most important lesson was that we don't have to accept that hurt just because it comes from family. It's been 2 years now since I reclaimed my life, and as I sit here telling you this story, I want you to know that these have been 2 of the happiest years I've had since Henry died. Not because everything has been perfect, but because everything has been mine. I wake up each morning in my own bed, in my own room, in my own house. I make coffee in my blue ceramic mug and sit at my kitchen table, looking out at the daffodils that bloom faithfully every spring. I decide what to eat for breakfast, what to wear, whether to work in the garden or call a friend or simply sit quietly with my memories. These small freedoms might seem insignificant to younger people who have never had their independence threatened, but to someone who has lived as a prisoner in her own home, they are precious beyond measure. My social life has blossomed in ways I never expected. The ladies from church have become true friends, not just acquaintances who see each other on Sundays. We have a book club that meets twice a month, and let me tell you, discussing romance novels with a group of women in their 70s and 80s is far more entertaining than you might imagine. I've also discovered a talent I never knew I had: public speaking. Word of my story spread through the community, and I was asked to speak at the senior center about elder abuse and how to recognize the warning signs. That first speech was terrifying, but the response was overwhelming. Afterward, 3 different women came up to me to say that they recognized their own situations in my story and asked for help. That's when I knew I had found my purpose for these remaining years. I now volunteer with the Area Agency on Aging, speaking at senior centers, assisted living facilities, and community groups about financial exploitation and emotional abuse of elderly people. I share my story not for sympathy, but as a roadmap for others who might find themselves in similar situations. The most important thing I want you to remember, I tell my audiences, is that age does not equal incompetence. Being elderly does not make you less deserving of respect, dignity, and autonomy. If family members or caregivers are making you feel stupid, helpless, or burdensome, trust your instincts. You know yourself better than anyone else does. I've helped dozens of people connect with legal resources, counseling services, and support networks. Some situations are resolved easily, with family members who genuinely didn't realize how their helpfulness was coming across. Others require more dramatic interventions, like mine did. But the common thread in all these stories is that the elderly person involved had started to believe they were powerless, that their age made them somehow less entitled to basic human dignity. My job is to remind them that's simply not true. Harold has become not just my lawyer, but one of my dearest friends. We have lunch together once a month, and he continues to marvel at what he calls my transformation. "Margaret," he told me recently, "when you first came to my office 2 years ago, you were like a ghost of yourself. Uncertain, apologetic, almost invisible. Now you're more vibrant and confident than people half your age. It's remarkable." "I'm not different," I told him. "I'm just myself again." And that's the truth of it. David and Sarah didn't create a new person when they systematically undermined my confidence and independence. They temporarily buried the person who had always been there. The woman who had survived the depression, raised a child, managed a household for decades, supported a husband through illness and death. That woman never went away. She was just convinced for a while that she wasn't worthy of respect or consideration. Emma visits me regularly now, usually bringing her younger brother Josh, who has grown into a thoughtful 16-year-old with his grandfather's kind eyes. They both call me regularly, remember my birthday, include me in their plans when they can. The relationship I have with my grandchildren now is deeper and more genuine than it ever was when we all lived under the same roof, probably because it's built on choice rather than obligation. David and I have had a few awkward encounters over the years, at Josh's school play, at Emma's high school graduation. We're polite to each other, but the easy warmth that once existed between us is gone, perhaps permanently. He's never taken full responsibility for what he did, never acknowledged that his actions were a systematic betrayal rather than well-intentioned mistakes. Sarah, surprisingly, has tried harder to repair the relationship. She sent me a long letter last Christmas, taking full responsibility for her part in what she now calls the worst period of my life. She's been in therapy, she wrote, working to understand how she lost her moral compass so completely. "I think I started seeing you as an obstacle to the life David and I wanted," she admitted in the letter. instead of a person with feelings and rights and dignity. I'm ashamed of the woman I became during those years, and I understand if you can never forgive me. I wrote back to her, a brief note saying that I appreciated her honesty and wished her well in her healing journey. I'm not ready for more than that, but it's something. The house has been transformed back into a home, filled with my own furniture, my own decorations, my own choices about how space should be used. The basement storage room has been turned into a small apartment, and I now rent it out to a young teacher named Jessica who needed affordable housing close to her school. She's become like the granddaughter I never had, often joining me for dinner and helping with household tasks that are becoming more difficult for my aging body. But here's the crucial difference. Jessica helps because she wants to, because we're friends, because she cares about my well-being, not because she's manipulating me or trying to gain control over my life. When I need help, I ask for it. When I don't, my independence is respected. It's a relationship based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. I've also made peace with the reality of aging. Yes, I'm slower than I used to be. Yes, some tasks that were once easy are now challenging. Yes, there will come a time when I need more assistance with daily living. But none of those facts make me less valuable as a person or less deserving of dignity and respect. I've updated my will and my advance directives, making clear provisions for my care if I become unable to care for myself. I've chosen people I trust to make decisions for me if necessary, people who have proven they see me as a whole person rather than just a collection of needs and problems. Most importantly, I've learned to trust myself again, to trust my perceptions, my feelings, my judgment. David and Sarah spent 3 years convincing me that I couldn't rely on my own mind, that I was too confused and forgetful to make good decisions. Recovering from that kind of systematic gaslighting has been one of the hardest parts of this journey. But I'm proud to tell you that at 89 years old, I am more myself than I have been in years. I know what I like and what I don't like. I know when someone is treating me with respect and when they're patronizing me. I know the difference between genuine concern and manipulative control. And I know something else. This story isn't over. I may be nearing the end of my life, but I'm not done living it. I have plans, dreams, goals. I want to see Emma graduate from college, watch Josh discover what he's passionate about, maybe even live long enough to welcome great-grandchildren into the world. I want to continue helping other elderly people find their voices and their strength. I want to keep working in my garden, keep reading books that challenge my thinking, keep learning new things about the world and about myself. Most of all, I want to continue being proof that age is just a number, that dignity doesn't have an expiration date, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself and reclaim your life. To anyone listening to this story who recognizes their own situation in mine, I want you to know, you are not powerless. You are not too old to fight back. You are not obligated to accept mistreatment just because it comes from family members who claim to love you. Your feelings matter. Your comfort matters. Your autonomy matters. You matter. And if you're someone who has elderly family members in your care, remember that they are still whole people with their own thoughts, feelings, preferences, and rights. Helping someone doesn't mean controlling them. Caring for someone doesn't mean erasing them. Love, real love, sees the person inside the aging body and honors their dignity even when they need assistance with daily tasks. Real love protects and empowers rather than manipulates and controls. I learned these lessons the hard way, but I learned them. And now, in what may be the final chapters of my own story, I'm using that knowledge to help others and to live each day with the dignity and independence I fought so hard to reclaim. The daffodils are blooming again outside my kitchen window as I finish telling you this story. They're the same flowers I planted with Henry 40 years ago, the same ones that have marked the arrival of spring in my garden for decades. They've weathered storms, harsh winters, periods of neglect, but they keep coming back year after year, beautiful and resilient, just like me. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring about an old woman's fight for dignity and respect. And remember, it's never too late to bloom again.